Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Arrival at Ashford Manor. The morning was crisp, with the amber light of early autumn spilling across the rolling hills of Kent. Mist clung to the valleys, lending a certain romance to the countryside, yet I detected no frivolity in the air. Rather, there was an undercurrent of tension, subtle yet insistent, as if the very walls of Ashford Manor had absorbed the anxiety of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, though small in stature, exuded an aura of quiet command. His posture was impeccable, his moustache meticulously groomed, and his attire, tailored to perfection, suggested a man whose order of mind extended to every fibre of his being. Beside me, Hastings attempted to keep pace, slightly hunched under the weight of his travel bag and the imposing impression of the manor itself. We arrived at the grand entrance shortly before 10 o'clock. The iron gates opened with a creak, revealing a long gravel drive lined with ancient oaks whose leaves had begun to turn shades of ochre and crimson. Poirot's sharp eyes flickered over every detail, the pattern of the gravel, the way the wind caused leaves to swirl, and the very way the gate's hinges groaned. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, almost to himself, "every detail tells a story. Even the smallest detail can be of the utmost importance. We must be vigilant. N'est-ce pas?" I nodded, though I confess I could not match the speed with which Poirot's mind sifted through impressions. As we approached the manor, a figure appeared on the broad stone steps, Lady Beatrice Ashford, the mistress of the house. She was a tall woman, graceful in her movements, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Her gloved hands clutched a delicate lace handkerchief, twisting it with a nervous energy that contrasted with the composed expression she tried to maintain. "Mr. Poirot, how grateful I am that you could come on such short notice," she said, her voice carrying both elegance and a subtle tremor. It is most distressing. My sapphire, my most treasured possession, has vanished." Poirot inclined his head in polite acknowledgement, his dark eyes narrowing slightly as he absorbed every nuance of Lady Beatrice's expression, posture, and tone. "Madam," he replied with his habitual precision, "vous avez raison. The loss of such a jewel is regrettable indeed. Mais, one must seek the truth with calm and method. Tell me, when was it last seen?" Lady Beatrice led us into a vast drawing room, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes, and its shelves lined with tomes that spoke of generations of wealth and refinement. In the center of the room, on a pedestal beneath a glass case, was the empty space where the sapphire, known as the Azure Heart, had been displayed. The absence was immediately striking, the empty velvet cushion almost mocking in its stillness. "It was to be displayed tonight, during our gala," Lady Beatrice explained. Her hands hovered briefly over the pedestal before settling nervously in her lap. "The case was locked. I cannot imagine anyone gaining access without my knowledge." And yet, her voice faltered, leaving a pregnant silence in the room. Poirot circled the display with deliberate care, noting the hinges of the case, the lock's mechanism, and even the minute scratches along the glass. He crouched slightly, inspecting the floor beneath, then ran a gloved finger along the velvet cushion. "Ah, yes, très intéressant," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Hastings, observe the precision. The lock shows no signs of forced entry, yet the glass is free of dust, untouched by careless hands. The thief, mon ami, is both patient and meticulous. This is no common theft. No brute would manage such subtlety." I peered over his shoulder, straining to follow his insight. "So you mean, someone in the house?" Poirot's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "Exactment. Someone who knows not only the layout but also the habits of the household. One who understands human nature, and the temptation it affords. Ah, yes, the mind of the thief is revealed as much by the items they covet as by the manner in which they act. Lady Beatrice sighed, clearly overwhelmed by both worry and relief at having engaged such a renowned detective. "You must find it, Mr. Poirot. It is not merely a jewel, it is a legacy, passed down through generations. My family's honor, in a sense, rests upon its safety." Poirot nodded solemnly, his eyes meeting hers. "Madam, the jewel shall be found. But first, we must examine every angle. Observe the guests, the servants, the very air of this house. Each carries with them a story, and it is in the story that the truth is hidden." As if summoned by his words, a soft shuffle of footsteps drew our attention. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hawthorne, appeared at the doorway, her expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I was told to show Mr. Poirot the guest list, sir," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "There are quite a number of people arriving for tonight's gala. Perhaps you will wish to speak with them individually." Poirot's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "My's OUI. Each guest, each servant, every individual, small detail, yes, but invaluable. You see, Hastings, the heart of detection is in observation, and observation is in detail. And here, within these walls, every detail has weight." He paused, turning his gaze toward the windows, through which the autumn sunlight filtered in golden streams. "Note the curtains, the placement of furniture, the angle of light. Even these seemingly trivial elements can betray a truth hidden from the careless eye. Ah, yes, n'est-ce pas extraordinary how humans overlook the obvious, while the clever detective sees all." Lady Beatrice watched him with a mixture of awe and impatience. "I must confess, Mr. Poirot, I do not understand how you see these things. It is as though you peer into people's souls." Poirot smiled, ever so slightly, and allowed a rare note of warmth into his voice. "Madam, it is not the soul I observe, but the evidence it leaves behind. Gesture, hesitation, speech, glance, these are the keys. One must be methodical, patient, and ever attentive. And so, we begin." With that, he gestured to the empty pedestal. "Hastings, take note of this. Everything, even absence, speaks. The very space where the sapphire should lie, it has a story to tell. And it is our task, Miss Amos, to listen carefully, and then to act with intelligence, finesse, and subtlety." Thus began our investigation at Ashford Manor. The air seemed charged with anticipation, and I could sense Poirot's mind working, turning every observation, every gesture, into threads that would eventually weave a tapestry of truth. Little did I know that within these walls, secrets both trivial and profound awaited revelation, and that the mystery of the Azure Heart would test even Poirot's remarkable abilities to their utmost limit. Chapter 2: The Guests and the Gossip. By mid-morning, the halls of Ashford Manor had begun to hum with activity. Servants moved briskly, dusting and polishing, while the kitchen filled with the clatter of pots and the aroma of roasting pheasant and fresh pastry. Poirot and I walked slowly through the grand corridor, each step carefully measured, each observation meticulously noted. Even the sound of our footsteps seemed to have its own significance in Poirot's eyes. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered, his gloved hands folded behind his back, "how the servants carry themselves. Even a maid's nervous glance, a foot tapping too quickly, a hand brushing a stray lock of hair, Toutzilla speaks. We must listen, watch, and interpret." I nodded, somewhat overwhelmed by his intensity, while trying to follow his subtle cues. Our first task was to meet the guests who had arrived for Lady Beatrice's gala. Poirot had insisted that we greet them individually, to gauge reactions, to note mannerisms, and most importantly, to detect any sign of guilt or anxiety regarding the missing sapphire. The first to appear was Sir Malcolm Hartley, a tall man of imposing presence. His military bearing was evident in his rigid posture and precise movements. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly as Sir Malcolm shook his hand with a firm grip. "Sir Malcolm, a pleasure," Poirot said politely. "You have travelled far." "From London," Sir Malcolm replied curtly. "I trust this unfortunate incident will be resolved quickly. A jewel of such value should not vanish under anyone's watch." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. But tell me, Sir Malcolm, do you often attend such gatherings?" His tone was casual, yet there was an edge of inquiry, as though probing the man's habits and possible motives simultaneously. Sir Malcolm stiffened ever so slightly. "From time to time. I am no stranger to society events, but I find them tiresome." He glanced around the room, his gaze briefly lingering on the empty pedestal, then shifted away. Poirot's eyes followed every motion, every flicker of the eyelid, every micro-expression. Next came Miss Lillian Moore, a young artist with a poised elegance that contrasted with the intensity of her dark eyes. She offered a careful smile, though Poirot detected the subtle tension in her shoulders and the slight tremor in her hands. "Miss Moore," Poirot said smoothly, "your reputation as an artist precedes you. Tell me, do you often find inspiration in grand houses such as Ashford?" I do, sometimes," she replied softly. "There is a certain atmosphere, a history, a story in the walls themselves." Her voice carried a melodic quality, but Poirot noticed that she avoided direct eye contact when he glanced at the empty display case. A flicker of unease passed over her features, almost imperceptibly, yet it did not escape the detective's attention. "Ah, yes, the story of the house is important," Poirot murmured, as though agreeing with her, but in fact noting the reaction of her hands, which fiddled nervously with the edge of her scarf. Following her was Mr. Edward Blake, Lady Beatrice's distant cousin. He entered the room with a casual air that belied his nervous energy. His clothes were fashionable, almost ostentatious, a curious choice for someone whose finances, Poirot had learned, were rather precarious. "Edward," Poirot said, inclining his head, "it is good to see family gathered together. Do you find yourself often at Ashford Manor?" "Not so often as I would like," Blake replied, a faint smirk crossing his lips. "Business keeps one occupied. But a party is always welcome." He laughed lightly, though it was a laugh without mirth, and Poirot immediately catalogued the inconsistency between the sound of amusement and the tension in his jaw. Finally, Mrs. Penelope Drake, a charming socialite, swept into the room. Her manner was effervescent, her smile dazzling, but Poirot detected something in her gaze, an inquisitiveness that bordered on intrusive. She moved gracefully, yet there was a restless energy in the tapping of her fingers. "Mrs. Drake, so delighted you could join us," Poirot said, his tone courteous. "Your interest in society events is well known, yes?" "Why, Mr. Poirot, you flatter me," she replied with a laugh. "I do enjoy a little intrigue, but nothing too scandalous, of course." Her eye sparkled, but Poirot's subtle observation revealed that she lingered just a moment too long near the drawing-room doors, as though curious about who else might be entering. After the initial introductions, Poirot invited the guests to sit in the drawing-room while he discreetly questioned the household staff. Mrs. Hawthorne, the housekeeper, proved particularly helpful, describing each guest's habits, arrival times, and minor peculiarities. Poirot listened attentively, occasionally nodding, occasionally noting something in his small notebook. "Ah, Hastings," he said quietly, "each human being is a puzzle, yes, but also a potential suspect. One must observe, yes, but also understand the psychology. A thief rarely thinks like a gentleman, yet sometimes their own vanity leads them to betray themselves." I followed him as he walked among the guests, silently noting their gestures and expressions. Poirot's method was subtle. He asked casual questions, watched reactions, and then allowed moments of silence, forcing the subject to reveal their own inner truth, often unintentionally. Sir Malcolm, when asked casually about his hobbies, spoke at length about military strategy and hunting. His answers were precise, almost rehearsed, but Poirot noticed a slight hesitation when the conversation drifted toward valuables or inheritance. Miss Moore, asked about her art, grew animated and passionate, yet her hands betrayed a nervous energy whenever the sapphire or Lady Beatrice's family legacy was mentioned. Edward Blake spoke with charm and wit, deflecting any pointed questions with humor, yet Poirot's gaze lingered on the faint scar of worry etched across his brow. Mrs. Drake, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of energy, asking innocuous questions about the house and guests while her eyes constantly darted toward the windows, as if measuring escape routes. By the time the afternoon sun began to slant across the manicured lawns, Poirot had quietly amassed a wealth of subtle information, the micro-expressions, the nervous tics, the fleeting glances, and the contradictions in speech and gesture. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said softly, pausing to study a tiny smudge on the marble mantelpiece. "Even a fingerprint, a mislaid item, or a glance can tell us more than pages of testimony. The heart of detection is patience. One must wait for the individual to reveal themselves, often through their own impulses." As evening approached, the manor grew more lively, guests arriving in increasing numbers. Poirot, ever composed, continued his subtle observations. It was clear that the Azure Heart had not merely vanished from the display, it had vanished from the minds of all who had laid eyes upon it. Each guest, each servant, carried a story, and Poirot, as always, was listening. Finally, he turned to me, a small smile playing across his lips. "Hastings, the game is afoot. But remember, patience, observation, and understanding of human nature will guide us. Tonight, we shall see who falters, who hides, and who, perhaps unknowingly, reveals the path to the jewel." With that, the stage was set. The guests mingled, laughter echoing in the grand halls, but beneath the surface lay a tension only a keen mind such as Poirot's could detect. Every glance, every gesture, every word carried potential significance. And I had no doubt that by tomorrow, the first threads of the Azure Heart's mysterious disappearance would begin to unravel. Chapter 3: The Discovery of the Break-In. The night descended upon Ashford Manor with a hush of anticipation. The grand gala, meant to celebrate Lady Beatrice's annual autumn ball, had begun in earnest. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished floors, while the guests mingled in elegant attire, exchanging polite smiles and carefully measured conversation. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, an undercurrent of anxiety lingered. For the Azure Heart, the prized sapphire of Lady Beatrice, remained absent, and the shadow of its disappearance loomed large over the festivities. Poirot, as ever, moved with quiet grace, a small figure among the crowd, observing with the precision of a hawk. Every gesture, every hesitation, every laugh, even the slightest twitch of an eyebrow, was catalogued in his keen mind. Hastings followed at a respectful distance, marveling as Poirot's eyes flicked from one guest to another with a detective's unerring intuition. It was during a lull in the conversation, just after the orchestra had struck the first delicate notes of a waltz, that the first hint of alarm arrived. A maid, breathless and pale, appeared at the drawing-room doorway. "Sir, madam," she stammered, her hands trembling, there is something unusual in the conservatory. A window, one of the smaller windows, near the east side, it is open." I did not open it." Poirot's eyes lit with that familiar spark of interest. "Ah. Très bien. Hastings, we must examine immediately. A window, you say? Open?" We followed the maid through the ornate corridors, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The conservatory, a glass pavilion at the far end of the east wing, was usually a place of serene beauty. Tonight, however, it seemed fraught with tension. The moonlight streamed through the large panes, casting angular shadows across the marble floor and exotic plants. Poirot paused, crouching slightly, his gloved fingers tracing the sill of the open window with the gentlest touch. "Notice, Hastings," he murmured, no violent marks. No splintered wood, no signs of struggle. Our thief is clever, very clever. A delicate hand, a practiced mind. He leaned closer to the lock, turning it in his fingers. See this scratch here? Almost invisible, yes, but it tells a story. Someone has manipulated the mechanism with finesse. No ordinary burglar, NSCE par. I bent over to examine the window myself. The lock was intact, the hinges unbroken, yet the window had clearly been lifted from the outside. A faint smear of dust along the sill suggested a careful hand had wiped it clean, but not completely. Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, detected something I had missed entirely, a faint fibre, caught in the corner of the frame, almost invisible to the casual observer. Ah, fibres, Hastings! Poirot exclaimed softly, his voice barely above a whisper. A glove, perhaps, worn by our delicate thief. Notice the colour, grey, fine wool. Subtle, but a clue, yes, yes. We moved further into the conservatory, inspecting the floor and the arrangement of the furniture. Nothing else appeared disturbed. Chairs remained aligned, a tea tray left untouched. Yet, Poirot's gaze lingered on the empty pedestal near the back of the room. And here, he said, gesturing to the base of a marble column, is where the jewel was likely kept before being removed. Observe the slight indentation on the carpet. Not forceful, but deliberate. The thief did not wish to alarm anyone. It is the subtlety of human nature, Hastings, that fascinates me. One wishes to take, yet one fears exposure. And it is in this fear that we find the truth. Poirot's attention shifted to the windowsill again, where the moonlight revealed the faintest traces of a footprint on the gravel outside. He knelt to inspect it, tracing the outline with his gloved fingers. See, Hastings. The shape is narrow, delicate, almost dainty. Sir Malcolm's boot is too wide, Blake's heel too coarse. Our thief is, how you say, nimble. Light of foot. And yet, they possess confidence, yes, for this action was not a clumsy attempt. It was a plan executed with precision. As Poirot catalogued every minute detail, Lady Beatrice entered the conservatory, her face pale but composed. She approached quietly, as though hesitant to disrupt the detective's careful investigation. Poirot, she said softly, what have you discovered? Poirot straightened, adjusting his cravat with his usual elegance. Madam, we have discovered that the thief is no ordinary criminal. There are no signs of forced entry, yet the window shows subtle manipulation. There are fibres from a glove, a faint footprint, and slight disturbances on the carpet. Each element, when considered, reveals the intelligence and careful planning behind this theft. Lady Beatrice wrung her hands together. But who could it be? Surely, it must be someone among our guests, her voice faltered. Ah, yes, madam, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm, the thief is indeed among those you consider friends, or at least acquaintances. One cannot steal such a treasure without familiarity. It is a matter of psychology. A stranger would be clumsy, hasty, and detectable. But here, all is subtle. This is the work of one who knows the house, its routines, and its people. Poirot turned to examine a table near the corner, his sharp eyes catching something unusual, a faint smudge of perfume on a glass vase. He touched it lightly with a fingertip, inhaling briefly. Hastings. Perfume, yes. Not madam's, not any servant's usual scent. A personal fragrance, light, floral, this is the mark of someone who wishes to be noticed only in the most delicate way. I could only marvel at Poirot's ability to interpret such minor details. But do you have any idea who it might be? I asked, trying to sound casual while my mind raced. Poirot shook his head slowly. Patience, Hastings. Each clue is like a note in a symphony. Alone, it has little meaning. Together, when we understand the psychology and the actions of each person, the melody, the truth, will become clear. But we must not rush. Haste is the enemy of justice. He then returned to the window, inspecting the angle at which it had been opened. Notice the skill, Hastings. A slight push, an angle perfectly calculated. One must know the weight of the sash, the tension of the lock. Only someone practiced, or very observant, could accomplish this without detection. And yet, even the cleverest sometimes leave a trace. Here, the fibre, the footprint, the perfume, these are our keys. Lady Beatrice looked at him with a mixture of awe and worry. You make it sound so simple, Monsieur Poirot. But I fear that the jewel may be lost forever. Poirot smiled, his dark eyes gleaming. Madam, nothing is lost when the mind observes carefully. Order, logic, and understanding of human nature, these are the instruments of detection. And in the coming hours, we shall see which of your guests is clever, and which is merely overconfident in their cunning. As the first strains of the orchestra drifted from the ballroom, Poirot stood in the moonlit conservatory, calm and composed. The subtle clues, the fibre, the footprint, the perfume, the careful manipulation of the window, all pointed to a thief of intelligence and finesse. Yet, like all mysteries, the final truth remained hidden, obscured by layers of human behavior, misdirection, and pride. We shall continue, Hastings, Poirot said quietly, almost to himself, to observe. To question. To watch. For in the grand theatre of human folly, the guilty always reveal themselves, sometimes in haste, sometimes in hesitation, and sometimes in the smallest detail that only a careful eye can see. And with that, Poirot, ever elegant and precise, prepared to unravel the threads of the mystery that had enveloped Ashford Manor. The Azure Heart had vanished, yet in its absence, a trail of subtle evidence had already begun to form. The game, as Poirot so often said, was afoot. Chapter 4, Secrets Unveiled. The morning after the gala dawned cool and crisp, with a delicate mist curling over the gardens of Ashford Manor. The previous night's tension still lingered in the halls, though the guests attempted to conceal it beneath polite smiles and murmured conversations. Poirot, however, observed every movement with the unerring precision for which he was renowned. After breakfast, he suggested a series of private interviews with the primary guests and certain members of the household. His reasoning, as always, was meticulous. Each person must be seen and understood individually, away from the influence of others, to observe their natural behavior and subtle reactions. Patience, Hastings, Poirot said as we prepared to begin. The human heart is a labyrinth. We must enter gently, observe each passage, and note every twist and turn. Only then does the truth reveal itself. We began with Sir Malcolm Hartley, the retired army officer. He received us in a study lined with leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Poirot's approach was gentle yet probing, a dance of subtle questions designed to elicit more than the spoken answer. Sir Malcolm, you mentioned yesterday your acquaintance with society events. And yet, I observed a certain tension when we spoke of valuables and inheritance. Might there be something you wish to confess? Sir Malcolm's brow furrowed slightly. Confess? I am puzzled, Monsieur Poirot. I have no reason to steal from Lady Beatrice. Yet, I have gambling debts, as you no doubt are aware, though recently I have been fortunate enough to recover a considerable sum. Poirot inclined his head, noting the slight tremor in Sir Malcolm's hands as he folded them over his lap. Yes, indeed. Yet, even the recovered sum does not eliminate the temptations of human weakness. A man may find curiosity, yes, and opportunity irresistible. But we shall see. Merci, Sir Malcolm. Next was Miss Lillian Moore, the young artist whose beauty and intensity contrasted sharply with her nervous energy. She welcomed us into the sunlit drawing room, a faint scent of oil paints lingering in the air. Miss Moore, Poirot began smoothly. I am curious about your past experiences in houses of this nature. You have travelled widely, yes? Yet I have learned of certain difficulties regarding trust and reputation in your previous employments. Miss Moore's eyes widened, her lips pressed tightly together. I was dismissed from a gallery, yes, but I swear it was a misunderstanding. No one accused me of theft directly. It was merely suspicion. That is all. Poirot leaned forward slightly, hands folded elegantly. Suspicion, yes. But suspicion itself leaves traces on the human mind, none. And how does one respond to suspicion when faced with temptation? Some falter, while others resist. We shall observe carefully, Miss Amis, how your nature meets the challenge of temptation. Miss Moore's gaze flickered toward the empty pedestal in the next room. Poirot's keen eyes followed the motion, noting the imperceptible tightening of her jaw. A tiny gesture, almost lost to a casual observer, yet immensely revealing to one trained in the art of psychology. We then spoke to Edward Blake, the distant cousin whose charm could mask a multitude of anxieties. He led us into the conservatory, where sunlight glinted off the glass panes and ornate plant pots. Edward, you have recently acquired fine clothing and accessories, despite certain financial constraints, Poirot said delicately. Might one ask how such items came to be yours? Blake's smile faltered for an instant, replaced by a flash of irritation. A man may indulge occasionally, may he not? I have business dealings that are profitable. Enough to maintain appearances. He gestured, and the way his eyes avoided direct contact with the sapphire pedestal. Are it appearances, one of the most persuasive temptations? And yet, the heart of man is revealed in small gestures. Do you find that difficult to maintain when confronted with temptation? Blake's smirk returned, though the shadows beneath his eyes betrayed unease. Poirot's notes were thorough, every twitch, every hesitation, every micro-expression carefully recorded. Finally, we interviewed Mrs. Penelope Drake, whose charm and vivacity were a contrast to the more restrained guests. She received us in the music room, the faint strains of a piano playing unattended from the previous evening lingering in the air. Mrs. Drake, Poirot began, you have shown considerable interest in the house, its guests, and the arrangements of the last evening. Curiosity is a virtue, yes, yet it may also betray hidden intentions. Mrs. Drake laughed lightly, her fingers brushing a piano key with casual elegance. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you, my curiosity is innocent. One must notice the details, of course. One cannot simply ignore what is happening in one's surroundings. Poirot's eyes, however, detected more than her words suggested. The way her gaze flicked toward the conservatory windows, the slight hesitation before responding, the restless tapping of her fingers, all revealed an underlying anxiety. He made a discreet note, invisible to her. After completing the interviews, Poirot convened a quiet discussion with Hastings in the library, away from the eyes of servants and guests. Hastings, observe the pattern, he said, pointing to his notes. Each individual exhibits traces of concern, yes, but the nature of their anxiety differs. Sir Malcolm's is financial, Blake's, defensive, Mrs. Drake's, inquisitive, and Miss Moore's, a mixture of fear and guilt, yes, very subtle. I frowned. But surely fear does not equal guilt? But Hastings, the human mind is rarely simple, Poirot replied with a gentle smile. Fear may arise from guilt, yes, but also from anticipation of discovery, or even from false accusation. The key is to note which gestures are natural, which are forced. Micro-expressions, hesitation, avoidance, all speak to the truth, if one knows how to read them. Poirot then returned to the drawing room to inspect the pedestal once more, noting the subtle imprint of the cushion where the sapphire had rested. He ran a gloved finger lightly over the velvet surface, almost as if reading an invisible script. OUI, the absence itself speaks. Notice, Hastings, the faint disarrangement of the fibers. Our thief did not rush, yet the jewel was removed with precision. This is a delicate mind at work, careful and calculated. Meanwhile, Lady Beatrice moved quietly among the guests, her anxiety slightly abated by Poirot's methodical presence. "I can only hope, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "that you will discover the truth. This jewel, it is more than a gem to my family. It is our heritage, our pride." Poirot inclined his head in acknowledgement, his expression unreadable but focused. "Madam, all shall be revealed in due course. But one must never underestimate the subtlety of human nature. Often, it is in the smallest, most unobserved gesture that the guilty reveal themselves." By midday, Poirot had gathered a wealth of subtle information, inconsistencies in stories, nervous habits, fleeting glances, and minor gestures that seemed insignificant but were, in fact, crucial. Each guest had secrets, some financial, some reputational, but all had opportunities, and all had exhibited moments of subtle anxiety around the sapphire's disappearance. "Now, Hastings," Poirot said quietly, closing his notebook with a precise motion, "we wait. Observe the interactions, note the discrepancies, and above all, watch. The guilty party, in their confidence or impatience, will reveal themselves. And when they do, it will be the smallest of clues, seemingly trivial, yet undeniable, that unmasks them." As the manor settled into the calm of the early afternoon, it was clear that Ashford Manor held more than elegance and wealth. Beneath its polished surface were concealed tensions, hidden ambitions, and quiet fears. Poirot, ever the master of human observation, was ready to unravel these threads, each revelation bringing him closer to the truth of the Azure Heart's disappearance. The game of observation, deduction, and psychology had begun in earnest, and each guest, each secret, and each subtle gesture was a piece of the intricate puzzle. Poirot's eyes gleamed with anticipation, for he knew that the truth lay not in force or confrontation, but in the careful reading of human nature itself. Chapter 5. The Clues Multiply. The morning air at Ashford Manor carried a chill, yet the tension within the house was warmer than ever, if such a contradiction were possible. Poirot moved through the grand corridors with his usual poise, each step deliberate, each glance a quiet study of the world around him. Hastings, trying to keep pace, noted how his friend's eyes missed nothing, the tilt of a vase, a speck of dust out of place, the faintest crease in a glove. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "the house speaks to us. Each room is a witness. And each witness, even silent, reveals subtle clues to the mind trained in observation. We began the day in the conservatory, the very place where the Azure Heart had vanished." Poirot crouched to inspect the gravel outside the east window, tracing the footprint he had first noticed on the previous night. "Ah, yes, fascinating," he said softly. "The footprint is small, delicate, yet the depth suggests a weight careful distributed. Not a man of heavy tread, perhaps our young artist, or a woman, but we must be cautious. Assumptions are dangerous." He then lifted a small corner of the velvet cushion on the pedestal where the sapphire had rested. A faint indentation ran along the fabric, almost imperceptible. Poirot's gloved finger traced it with a reverent precision. "Notice, Hastings," he whispered. The jewel was lifted with care, not seized hastily. The thief understood its value and handled it with a delicacy most unusual. This is no act of desperation, it is an act of cunning. Poirot's attention then turned to a curious scent lingering in the conservatory air. He inhaled lightly, closing his eyes, and nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, perfume, yes. Subtle, floral, with a hint of jasmine. Not Madame's usual scent, nor that of the housemaids. Someone brought their personal fragrance into this room. A most delicate clue, yet it cannot be ignored. It will guide us to our thief." We moved to the ballroom, where the gala had left faint traces of its elegance. Poirot studied the polished parquet floor, the slight scuff marks from shoes, and the careful arrangement of chairs and tables. His gaze flicked to the buffet table, noting crumbs and fingerprints, each a testament to human presence. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, "the fingerprints on the silver tray, not those of servants. And the slight smudge on the polished railing, someone passed here in haste, but with a measured step. Each movement tells a story. The thief is clever, yes, but not infallible." Poirot then examined a small cluster of fibers caught on the edge of a marble balustrade near the conservatory door. He picked them up carefully, rolling them between his gloved fingers. "Ah, fibers, yes. Grey wool, fine quality. Similar to those I noticed on the windowsill. They are significant. Likely part of a glove worn during the removal of the sapphire. A thief always leaves a trace, if one observes with patience and care. This is our thread, Hastings, literally and figuratively." Our investigation continued throughout the morning, extending to the servants' quarters and guest bedrooms. Poirot spoke softly with the housekeeper, Mrs. Hawthorne, who was careful to maintain decorum yet inadvertently revealed tiny slips in her account of the guests' movements. "Ah, Hastings, notice this," Poirot said, pointing to a note Mrs. Hawthorne had prepared. "She mentions Miss Moore leaving the room for air several times during the evening. Minor, yes, but repeated absences allow opportunity, no? Even a delicate act may mask intention." Later, Poirot returned to the drawing room, where Lady Beatrice joined us, her expression anxious but composed. She examined the empty pedestal with an almost wistful care, as if willing the jewel to reappear through force of will alone. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "you must trust that observation, patience, and psychology will bring clarity. We have discovered fibers, perfume, footprints, and signs of careful handling. Each is a clue, but none alone suffices. Together, they form a map, yes, a map that will lead us to the truth." Poirot's attention then shifted to a curious detail, a faint smear of ink on a corner of the guest register. He leaned over, inspecting it with meticulous care. "See, Hastings," he said softly. "A careless mark, perhaps overlooked by the individual, yet significant. It suggests someone has signed hastily, perhaps under tension or guilt. The very act of writing can betray the mind, OUI. These small gestures reveal more than words ever could." We returned to the conservatory, where Poirot crouched to study the window again. The scratches on the lock were now more visible in the morning light. He traced them with the tip of his finger, noting the precision. "Ah, our thief," he whispered, "understood the mechanics of this window. No force, only knowledge. And yet, one cannot be perfect. See this slight residue? A fingerprint, faint but present. Combined with the fibers, the perfume, and the footprints, it tells a story. A story of patience, calculation, and human weakness." Poirot then asked me to examine the chairs near the pedestal. I noticed that one chair was slightly out of alignment, a minor detail I had not paid attention to before. "OUI, Hastings," Poirot said approvingly, "even a chair, displaced by a few inches, reveals the path taken by our thief. They moved carefully, yes, but inevitably, small signs are left behind. And it is these signs, multiplied by subtle observations, that create a web from which the guilty cannot escape." By afternoon, Poirot had begun to synthesize the information. He compared the fibers to gloves in the cloakroom, sniffed the lingering perfumes on various personal effects, and revisited the footprint with a caliper, measuring its exact dimensions. "Precision is everything, Hastings," he said. "One cannot rely on memory or assumption. One must measure, compare, and then consider the psychology. And in this case, the psychology is most revealing. Each guest has opportunity, yes, but only one has combined opportunity with the subtle cues revealed by their movements, their anxieties, and their gestures. Poirot then gathered all the household staff in a discreet meeting. He asked them to recount the arrival and movements of each guest once more, carefully noting any inconsistencies. "Ah, the web is becoming clear," he murmured as he wrote tiny notes in his notebook. "Red herrings, yes, but they serve a purpose. They distract, they mislead, they test the detective. And yet, by careful observation, one can see which strands are genuine and which are false. The fingerprint, the fiber, the perfume, the footprint, all converge upon a central point, yes. And from this convergence, Hastings, the guilty party, will emerge." As evening approached, the house grew quieter. The guests, unaware of the intensity of Poirot's investigation, mingled politely, their laughter and conversation masking underlying tension. Poirot, standing by the grand window overlooking the gardens, seemed to merge with the shadows, his dark eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Hastings," he said finally, turning to me, "we have multiplied our clues. Each is minor in isolation, yet together they form a tapestry of truth. Patience, observation, psychology, these are our tools. And soon the threads shall converge. The guilty, by pride or by oversight, will reveal themselves." The Azure Heart remained missing, yet the map of its disappearance was becoming clearer. Every footprint, every fiber, every faint trace of perfume and every imperceptible smudge were no longer random, they were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot, with his unmatched intellect, was beginning to assemble. And I knew, with the certainty that comes from witnessing Poirot at work countless times, that the truth was imminent. The cunning of the thief, the subtlety of the clues, and the psychology of those within Ashford Manor, all would soon be revealed in the brilliant clarity that only Hercule Poirot could provide. Chapter 6. Tensions Rise. The sun had dipped low behind the rolling hills of Kent, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens of Ashford Manor. The evening promised serenity, but inside the grand halls, tension hummed as palpably as the fading notes of a distant piano. Poirot, with his usual meticulous calm, moved among the guests, ever watchful, observing gestures, expressions, and the minutest signs of unease. Hastings followed closely, as always, though he struggled to keep pace with Poirot's keen perception. "Mon Dieu, Poirot," I whispered, "it seems everyone here carries an air of suspicion, yet none will admit it." "Ah, Hastings," Poirot replied softly, "suspicion is a veil, yes, but it is not always deception. Sometimes it is fear, sometimes pride, and sometimes the subtle anticipation of being discovered. We must watch carefully. The guilty, in their confidence or nervousness, will reveal themselves, n'est-ce pas?" The first person to draw Poirot's attention was Miss Lillian Moore. She had been seated near the grand piano, ostensibly admiring a bouquet of roses, yet her fingers fiddled restlessly with the hem of her dress. Her eyes flitted repeatedly to the pedestal in the corner where the Azure Heart had been displayed, betraying an anxiety she could not entirely hide. Poirot approached her gently. "Mademoiselle, you appear distracted. Perhaps the beauty of the evening overwhelms your artistic sensibilities." Miss Moore forced a smile. I am merely taking in the surroundings, Monsieur Poirot. The house is inspiring." Poirot's eyes, however, noted the subtle tension in her shoulders, the slight quiver in her hands, and the faint paling of her lips. "Ah, yes, inspiration may cause agitation as well as delight," he murmured, almost to himself. Nearby, Edward Blake was speaking animatedly to a small cluster of guests. His charm was evident, but Poirot's trained eye caught the micro-expressions of nervousness, the tightness around his mouth, the occasional twitch of a finger, and the way his gaze avoided direct contact with certain areas of the room, particularly the empty pedestal. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "his confidence is a mask. Beneath it lies concern, carefully veiled. The guilty are always overconfident, yes, until a subtle test reveals their cracks. We shall soon apply such a test." Mrs. Penelope Drake, meanwhile, glided gracefully between groups of guests, her laughter bright, yet her eyes scanned the room like a hawk. Poirot noted the restlessness in her fingers, the slight hesitation in her steps when approaching the conservatory doorway. Even her charm, so well honed, could not conceal the smallest trace of anxiety. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Each of them has motive, opportunity, and subtle signs of unease. Yet only one combines these with the precise actions of our delicate thief. Observation will reveal the difference." As the evening wore on, Poirot orchestrated what he called a subtle test. He had requested a small, empty jewelry box resembling the sapphire's case to be placed in the drawing room. It was merely a decoy, yet he knew instinctively that the guilty party's reaction would betray them. We gathered in the drawing room, the other guests unaware of the purpose behind the arrangement. Poirot stood slightly apart, his posture composed, his eye sweeping over the assembled company. "Notice, Hastings," he whispered, "how the mind of the guilty responds to suggestion. A decoy, and yet it is irresistible. Observe the gestures, the glances, the slightest tension in muscles. These are more revealing than words." Miss Moore, upon glimpsing the box, stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her hand moved slightly, as if to adjust her dress or conceal her reaction. Edward Blake's eyes flicked toward it, and he forced a laugh, though his jaw tightened minutely. Mrs. Drake paused near the piano, then stepped back, seemingly composed, yet Poirot noted the faint exhalation of air she tried to suppress. "The guilty reveal themselves in moments like these," Poirot whispered. "It is impossible to maintain perfect control when the mind is confronted with temptation and fear simultaneously." After a brief period of observation, Poirot requested that each guest participate in a casual conversation about the previous evening. He asked each to recount a minor event, a toast, a conversation, or an amusing observation. Subtle discrepancies soon emerged. Sir Malcolm's story of the final toast was accurate, yet his recollection of the seating arrangement showed a minor hesitation, which Poirot noted with a sharp, silent observation. Miss Moore's account of the music played during the gala was vivid, yet Poirot detected tiny inconsistencies in her timeline, the briefest pause that betrayed either anxiety or fabrication. Edward Blake's narrative was lively, yet certain details, particularly about his movements near the conservatory, were evasive. Mrs. Drake's recounting, though smooth, revealed a brief moment of misremembered sequence, almost imperceptible, yet revealing to a careful observer. Poirot, standing with hands clasped behind his back, nodded subtly. "Yes, Hastings, the threads are converging. Observe how they falter under gentle pressure. Observe how subtle suggestion brings truth to light. One must not rush confrontation, the guilty often reveal themselves without realizing it." He then instructed the household staff to carry out small, routine tasks while the guests observed. Chairs were rearranged slightly, objects lightly moved. Poirot watched the reactions closely. Miss Moore's eyes flicked repeatedly to the pedestal, Edward Blake shifted in his seat, unconsciously adjusting his cufflinks, Mrs. Drake's fingers lingered over a decorative vase, as though measuring distance or potential escape routes. The guilty party, Poirot whispered to Hastings, is clever, yes, and confident, yet human nature cannot be entirely controlled. A micro-expression, a fleeting glance, a minor hesitation, these are impossible to suppress. And it is here that patience and observation triumph over cunning. The tension in the manor grew more palpable as the evening deepened. Guests, unaware of Poirot's scrutiny, chatted and laughed, yet beneath the surface, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Poirot moved quietly among them, noting the slightest inconsistencies, the smallest reactions, the faintest betrayals of human nature. Finally, he instructed us to retire briefly to the library. Alone with Hastings, he spread out his notes and observations. "Hastings," he said, "observe the psychological patterns. Miss Moore exhibits fear and subtle guilt, Edward Blake, evasiveness, Mrs. Drake, a restless curiosity. Each is a potential suspect, yet only one combines opportunity, motive, and the precise indicators revealed by our physical clues, the fibers, the perfume, the footprints, the careful manipulation of the window. I leaned over, concerned. But Poirot, how will we confirm which one is truly guilty? Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Patience, Hastings. The final revelation comes not from force, but from subtle pressure and the human instinct to betray oneself. And soon, the thread shall converge. One will falter, one will reveal too much, one will be seen by the trained eye. Ah, yes, the guilty always reveal themselves in the theatre of human nature. As the moon rose over Ashford Manor, casting silvery light across the gardens, the stage was set. The guests, unaware of the invisible scrutiny surrounding them, continued their polite interactions, laughter masking tension, while Poirot, ever composed, observed silently. The Azure Heart remained missing, yet the network of clues was growing more intricate, and the psychological pressure he applied was drawing the guilty party ever closer to inadvertent confession. Inside the manor, subtle signs multiplied, glances exchanged, hands trembling, fleeting hesitations, all threads in a tapestry only Poirot could read in its entirety. And as the night deepened, it became increasingly clear that the resolution of the Azure Heart's disappearance was not a matter of brute force or luck, it was a matter of careful observation, psychological acuity, and the unparalleled skill of Hercule Poirot. The game, as ever, was afoot, and the tension in Ashford Manor was palpable, electric with the promise that the truth was near. Chapter 7: The Tangled Motives. The dawn broke over Ashford Manor with a pale, golden light, though the mansion itself seemed darker than ever. Tension lingered like a mist over the grand corridors, thick with whispers, half-glances, and subtle gestures that only a careful observer could detect. Poirot moved among the rooms with his characteristic grace, his mind constantly analyzing the behavior of the household and the assembled guests. Hastings struggled to keep pace, his concern for both the missing Azure Heart and Poirot's meticulous methods growing by the hour. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured as we entered the drawing room. "The human mind is a labyrinth, yes, and every one of our guests carries secrets. Some are minor, some significant. But all have motives, whether they admit it or not. The thief is hiding among them, and the challenge is to untangle the web of deception." The morning began with interviews of the household staff, each providing additional nuances. Mrs. Hawthorne, the housekeeper, revealed that she had noticed small discrepancies in the guests' movements during the previous night's gala, details she had considered trivial at the time. "Sir," she said, wringing her hands, "I thought it strange that Miss Moore left the ballroom 3 times in quick succession." And Edward Blake, he seemed unusually interested in the conservatory, though he claimed he was merely admiring the view. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Yes, observe, Hastings. Even seemingly innocent explanations reveal the psychology of the individual. A guilty conscience, even if subtle, cannot entirely disguise itself. We then returned to the drawing room, where the principal guests had gathered under the pretense of casual conversation. Poirot's eye swept across the room, noting the minutest details, the way Miss Moore's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, the rapid blinking of Edward Blake as he responded to an innocuous question, and Mrs. Drake's slight lean toward the conservatory door, as though measuring potential escape routes. "Notice, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "the manner in which each person interacts. These gestures, these hesitations, are not random. They are the unconscious language of guilt, fear, or anticipation. The mind, when pressured, speaks even if the lips remain silent." Poirot then initiated a subtle experiment. He mentioned in passing that Lady Beatrice was considering loaning the Azure Heart to a London museum for a special exhibition, a hypothetical scenario designed to gauge the reactions of the guests. Miss Moore's face paled slightly, and she pressed her lips together. Edward Blake laughed lightly, but there was a tension in his shoulders, almost imperceptible. Mrs. Drake's eye sparkled, yet there was a faint shadow of calculation in the tilt of her head. Poirot noted each reaction carefully. "Observe," he whispered, "the flicker of emotion when the jewel's potential movement is suggested. The guilty cannot conceal the stakes, no matter how polite their smile. The mind betrays them, yes, even if subtly." We moved to the conservatory again, where Poirot examined the pedestal, the small indentations in the carpet, and the fibres he had previously discovered. He ran his gloved fingers over the surface, noting once more the careful precision with which the sapphire had been removed. "Hastings," he murmured, "the combination of physical clues and psychological observation is our most powerful tool. Consider the glove fibres, the footprint, and the faint perfume. Combine these with the subtle reactions observed this morning, and the pattern begins to emerge." Poirot then spoke with Sir Malcolm Hartley privately, questioning him about his financial situation and recent gambling activities. Sir Malcolm's answers were precise, but Poirot detected a faint hesitation when he mentioned his recent winnings. "Sir Malcolm," Poirot said softly, "one must always consider the influence of motive. Opportunity is one element, yes, but human desire, fear, greed, vanity, guides action more often than we realize." Sir Malcolm nodded, though his face betrayed a flicker of unease. I have means now. But that does not mean I would. I could not imagine taking such a treasure from Lady Beatrice." Poirot's gaze, sharp and discerning, did not waver. "The mind is full of justifications, yes, Hastings. And sometimes, even an innocent person can act under the sway of opportunity, if the temptation is irresistible. We must be vigilant and consider all possibilities, yes." Returning to the main drawing room, Poirot gathered the guests for a more structured discussion. He asked each to recount their movements during the gala, pressing subtly for inconsistencies. Small discrepancies emerged. Miss Moore's timeline of her absences from the ballroom was vague. Edward Blake's description of his route to the conservatory included minor, but significant, inaccuracies, and Mrs. Drake's account of her interactions with other guests contained brief, unexplained pauses. "Ah," Poirot murmured under his breath, "the threads are becoming tangled. Observe, Hastings, how the mind weaves deception, even unconsciously. Each hesitation, each slight misstatement, is a thread we must follow." Poirot then asked the guests to inspect the decoy jewellery box placed in the drawing room, subtly noting their reactions. Miss Moore's gaze lingered too long on the box, Edward Blake's hand twitched toward the pedestal, Mrs. Drake's fingers brushed a nearby table as if measuring the distance to the window. Each gesture was minute, almost imperceptible, yet it told a story to Poirot's trained eye. After the demonstration, Poirot spoke quietly with Hastings. "The guilty party has now been subjected to both direct observation and subtle psychological pressure. Their reactions, though carefully masked, betray an inattention. Hastings, the careful detective does not rush. The guilty are revealed by their own impulses, often in the smallest, most overlooked detail." The day's tension reached its peak when Lady Beatrice requested a private audience with Poirot. She led him to the library, her expression anxious, her hands clasping a delicate lace handkerchief. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I am most concerned. This jewel, it is not merely valuable. It is our family's legacy. Please, tell me, is there hope that it will be recovered?" Poirot's dark eyes met hers, calm and composed. "Madam, every clue, every observation, every gesture is being recorded in the mind. The threads are all visible. Soon, patience and careful reasoning will bring clarity. The guilty, Hastings, will reveal themselves, as they always do, through the subtle but undeniable truth of human nature." He paused, folding his hands behind his back. "Observe, madam, the nature of truth, it is persistent, it endures, and it cannot be suppressed indefinitely. Lies, hesitation, and misdirection may delay revelation, but the truth, yes, the truth will emerge, as always." As evening approached, Poirot instructed a final set of subtle maneuvers. Guests were asked to engage in casual games and light conversation, all designed to provoke micro-expressions, unconscious gestures, and revealing statements. He watched with quiet intensity, noting each small detail, a flicker of fear, a slight smirk, a tense muscle, a hand brushing an item instinctively. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot whispered, "the theatre of human behavior. Each guest plays a role, yes, but the unconscious always speaks. In these interactions, the guilty will leave their mark. And when that moment comes, we shall act, not by accusation, but by reason, logic, and the subtle evidence of observation." By nightfall, the threads of the tangled web were almost entirely laid bare. Clues, red herrings, and subtle gestures had created a network of psychological insight that Poirot alone could decipher. The stage was set for revelation, the final confrontation that would unmask the thief and recover the Azure Heart. Hastings, exhausted yet captivated, followed Poirot into the drawing room once more. "Do you truly think we will find the thief tonight?" I asked quietly. Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic expression. "Hastings, the truth is already present. One must only observe carefully, apply reasoning, and watch for the moment when the guilty party's own impulses betray them. Ah, yes, very soon, the mystery of the Azure Heart will be solved." And as the moon cast silver light across the gardens of Ashford Manor, the tension in the house reached a boiling point. Subtle glances, whispered remarks, and fleeting gestures had set the stage. Only one question remained: who among the guests would falter first under the quiet, unrelenting scrutiny of Hercule Poirot? Chapter 8: The Brilliant Reveal. The moonlight spilled softly across Ashford Manor as Poirot summoned the principal guests to the drawing room. The evening had grown tense, though outwardly the gathering appeared composed and polite. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, the decoy jewelry box placed conspicuously on a side table. The air was thick with anticipation, even Hastings could feel the electric charge of expectation. Poirot stood by the pedestal where the Azure Heart had been displayed, his gloved hands folded behind his back, a picture of calm and elegance. Every detail of the room, the placement of the chairs, the slight angle of the window, the patterns of shadow cast by the chandeliers, was deliberate. His mind had pieced together every subtle clue, every hesitant gesture, every trace of perfume, fibre, and footprint collected over the past days. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet commanding, "we are here to resolve a matter of great importance, the disappearance of the Azure Heart. As you know, this jewel is more than mere adornment, it is a family legacy. Yet, its absence has revealed much about human nature, as well as the art of observation and deduction." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Moore shifted slightly in her chair, her fingers nervously brushing the edge of her dress. Edward Blake leaned back, attempting to maintain a composed smile, while Mrs. Drake's eyes sparkled with curiosity and suppressed tension. Sir Malcolm Hartley's hands were folded, rigid and precise, yet a flicker of unease betrayed his otherwise controlled posture. Poirot raised a gloved finger. "I have spent these days observing, questioning, and considering every action, every hesitation, and every gesture. Each of you has been seen, each of you has been noted. And through these observations, the truth becomes clear." He began by reviewing the physical evidence. First, the window of the conservatory. It was opened with precision, no force applied, indicating knowledge of its mechanism. A footprint outside suggests a light, nimble individual. Fibers from a glove were found on the windowsill, fine grey wool. And a subtle perfume, floral with a hint of jasmine, lingered in the air. Poirot moved deliberately around the room, his gaze settling briefly on each guest. Next, the behavioral clues. Micro-expressions, hesitation, fidgeting, evasion, all small, often imperceptible, yet revealing to one trained in observation. Miss Moore exhibited fear and subtle guilt, particularly when the idea of the jewel being displayed elsewhere was mentioned. Edward Blake displayed tension and evasiveness when questioned about his movements near the conservatory. Mrs. Drake's restlessness suggested curiosity coupled with anxiety. Sir Malcolm's slight hesitation regarding financial matters indicated possible motive, though not opportunity sufficient for this theft. Hastings leaned closer, his curiosity nearly as keen as Poirot's. "So who, Poirot?" I whispered. "Patience, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "One must allow the guilty party to reveal themselves fully." Poirot then drew attention to the decoy box on the side table. "I placed this here deliberately. It is a test of impulse, a measure of response under subtle psychological pressure. Watch closely, Hastings." Miss Moore's eyes flitted toward the box, and her hands twitched slightly. Edward Blake's gaze also lingered, and he smiled nervously. Mrs. Drake leaned forward, her fingers brushing the edge of a nearby table, as if calculating distance. Sir Malcolm remained composed, almost impervious, his gestures precise and measured. Poirot nodded, satisfied. "Observe, Hastings. Micro-expressions, minor gestures, fleeting hesitation, all betray the guilty. One cannot maintain perfect composure when the mind wrestles with the pressure of guilt and the temptation of discovery." He turned to address the guests directly. "Through careful observation, analysis of physical clues, and subtle psychological testing, the picture has become clear. The thief is Miss Lillian Moore." Gasps filled the room. Miss Moore's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Monsieur Poirot." I didn't. I would never." Poirot's expression remained calm, almost gentle. "Ah, mademoiselle, the evidence, though subtle, is undeniable. The fibers on the windowsill, the footprint, the careful handling of the jewel, the faint perfume, these were all traces of your presence. And the minor inconsistencies in your account, your gestures, and your reactions during subtle psychological testing confirm the truth." Miss Moore's voice trembled. I only wanted to borrow it, to admire its beauty privately. I never intended to steal it permanently." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Desire alone does not excuse action, mademoiselle. Yet the human mind is complex. Your impulses, your careful planning, and your fear of discovery all speak louder than words. You acted not out of malice, but out of temptation and fascination." He then gestured toward the pedestal. "And the Azure Heart?" It was hidden in a small compartment behind the conservatory's ornamental panel. Only someone familiar with the room and unobserved by others could access it. Your knowledge of the house's layout, your light step, and your precise actions facilitated the theft and concealment. Hastings shook his head in amazement. "Poirot, how did you put it all together so quickly?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, one does not act quickly without reason. Every detail is a thread. One must follow each thread patiently until the pattern emerges. The fibers, perfume, footprint, psychological responses, all were pieces of a puzzle. Combine these with careful observation of human nature, and the picture becomes undeniable." Poirot turned to Miss Moore. "Mademoiselle, return the jewel. You will find it as I have described. No force is necessary, honesty and action will restore balance." Miss Moore, trembling yet relieved, moved to the conservatory with Poirot and Hastings. Behind the ornamental panel, the Azure Heart gleamed, its deep azure brilliance catching the moonlight. She carefully lifted the sapphire and returned it to the pedestal, her eyes downcast yet filled with a mixture of relief and remorse. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot addressed the assembled guests. "Let this serve as a lesson in human nature. Even the smallest impulses, when combined with opportunity and knowledge, can lead to actions unintended and regretted. But also let it demonstrate the power of observation, patience, and reasoning. Every action leaves a trace, every hesitation is a sign, every unconscious gesture is a message to those trained to read it. Edward Blake let out a low whistle. Remarkable, Poirot. I never would have suspected. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, mon ami, that is the art of detection. The guilty do not always announce themselves. One must listen to the whispers of action, observe the flickers of expression, and understand the complexities of human psychology. And from these, one may reveal the truth hidden beneath layers of polite pretense. Mrs. Drake, composed yet clearly impressed, clapped lightly. I must admit, Poirot, I was intrigued by your method. Subtle, elegant, and utterly precise. Poirot inclined his head gracefully. Merci, madame. The detective's art is one of patience, order, and understanding. And in the end, the truth emerges, as it always does, through the smallest but most telling of clues. Lady Beatrice, her face radiant with relief, approached Poirot. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have restored not only my jewel, but also my confidence in human nature. Poirot smiled modestly. Madam, it is the nature of the mind to conceal, but also to reveal. One must only observe carefully, apply reason, and wait for the moment of revelation. As the night settled over Ashford Manor, calm replaced the tension that had gripped the household. The Azure Heart rested securely upon its pedestal, and Miss Moore, though remorseful, had been guided toward honesty and restitution. Poirot, ever composed, stood in the moonlit drawing-room, his eyes reflecting satisfaction at a mystery meticulously unraveled. Hastings, still marveling, whispered, Poirot, you make it seem so simple. Yet I know it is anything but. Mon ami, Poirot said, his tone both gentle and triumphant, simplicity is found in observation, order, and understanding. The complexity lies in human nature, but with patience and reason, even the most intricate of puzzles yields. And tonight, the Azure Heart shines once more, and justice, subtle yet certain, has been restored. And so the case was closed, the Azure Heart recovered, the guilty party revealed, and Poirot's brilliance once again demonstrated the power of observation, patience, and psychological insight. The house returned to its serene elegance, yet the memory of suspense, subtle deceit, and human frailty lingered, a testament to the enduring art of Hercule Poirot.